Okay, so it is 2:01, so we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll keep admitting people as they show up. Thanks again for everybody attending today. We appreciate everybody participating in these events. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Scott Douglas. I'm the director of the Hahn Horticulture Garden. Today, we're going to be traveling 784 miles, give or take a few, northwest towards Wisconsin. We are going to be visiting the University of Wisconsin Madison Arboretum. Before we get started, we're going to hit the usual Zoom stuff. So we are using standard Zoom. So if everybody could turn off their video and make sure they're muted so that we don't have any interruptions during the talk, and to minimize the amount of data that everybody needs in order to see this. For best viewing, you should be able to put yourself on speaker view in Zoom, and that's up at the top right corner. If you click view, you can choose speaker view. If you have questions for the presenter today, you can just put them in the chat box and we'll address those at the end of the talk. So today our guest is David Stevens. He is the Longenecker Horticulture Garden Curator at the University of Wisconsin Madison Arboretum. He is also an alumni from the Virginia Tech Horticulture Department. So this is 2 weeks in a row that we have an alumni talking with us. I'll let him talk more about his background and his experiences. So I will now hand this off to David. David, thank you for doing this today.
Well, absolutely. Thank you so much, Scott. I appear to be unmuted. Is that everybody? Can you hear me? For some reason, I'm not showing up here. But thank you all for joining us today. It's certainly an honor to be talking to my alma mater. A little bit about me. My work background includes tree breeding and selection, greenhouse facility management, both here in North America and in Europe, public garden supervision, and commercial vegetable production. As Scott mentioned, my undergrad degree is in horticulture from Virginia Tech. And I have a master's degree also in horticulture from UW-Madison here. When I'm not here at the Arboretum, I help to run a 130-acre certified organic farm with my wife, Jane. And that's about an hour to the northwest of Madison. And last year, we were awarded the prestigious Organic Farmer of the Year award by the Midwest Organic Sustainable Education Service. Our farm produces primarily specialty herbs, vegetables, grass-fed beef, pastured poultry, and maple syrup. So the other thing I think we'll point out is that we are celebrating our 86th anniversary of the horticultural gardens here at the UW-Madison Arboretum this year. And I am just the third curator in that 86 years. So I came on board in 2015. So we'll start in here. Here's probably one of our most famous views of the garden, sitting atop a glacial drumlin. We'll talk a little bit about as the talk progresses. So for those of you who have not been to the Arboretum before, it encompasses 1,240 acres situated right in Madison. We're about 2 miles to the south of campus. And the first gardens started, well, not really gardens, but we consider 1933 to be the year the Arboretum broke ground. We also own another 517 acres of additional offsite prairies, offsite properties, we'll talk about prairies in a minute, that are spread throughout the state. And 7 of those are actually designated as state natural areas, which protect outstanding examples of Wisconsin's native landscape of natural communities and/or significant geological formations and archaeological sites. We also contain the first prairie restoration in the world, and as such, we are considered the birthplace of ecological restoration. The gardens, as well as the entire property, is free and open to the public year-round. And Pre-COVID, we estimated our visitorship at approximately 1 million visitors a year. Being gateless, having this large an acreage situated right in town, it's very difficult for us to count numbers. But I will tell you, we know for a fact that our visitorship skyrocketed last year. We actually had to close down the road, the main road into the visitor center here, which was also closed because we just had too many walkers, bikers, skateboarders, etc., to make it safe for cars to be on there. And I'll tell you, this year we're seeing a similar increase in visitorship. And of those visitors, I'd say about 75% find their way into the horticultural gardens here. We have 17 miles of walking trails here. We are divided into about 50 plus management units, and we contain 21 Native American effigy mounds. And those are located just to the northeast of the horticultural gardens, which are here. And we can get a sense of what they look like over here. As I mentioned, we have the first prairie restoration in the world. It was named for John Curtis, who did most of the research there. He was a botanist on campus and did a lot of work with native plants throughout the state. When folks come to Wisconsin and you're into botany or horticulture, he wrote the famous book, The Plants of Wisconsin, or The Vegetation of Wisconsin, which set out to put into writing all the native species here. So the prairie restoration began in 1935. They really didn't know what they were doing. These were simply farm fields at that time. So they tried a variety of different methods, from spreading seed to going out to prairies and prairie remnants and digging plants, something we would never do today. And finally, the thing that worked the best was digging up the sod and replanting it here. That, of course, destroyed these little remnants, and that quickly was put to the side. Along with the prairie, we were the first to experiment and actually do a scientific study on fire and prairie. So this is still going on today. I'm on our fire crew, and we just had our last controlled burn yesterday. Aldo Leopold is probably our best known former employee here. He was the Arboretum's original director of research, a position he held from our inception in 1933 until his untimely death in 1948. He's probably most well known for writing a Sand County Almanac, a book I read as an undergrad at Virginia Tech. But he's also known as the father of wildlife ecology. Aldo's actual degree was in forestry, graduated from the Yale School of Forestry. And due to some other circumstances, he ended up here in Madison, working for the Forest Products Lab. But what Aldo did was he took the tenets of forestry and sustainable harvest and overlaid that on to wildlife, especially wildlife that is hunted for game. And due to his background, was able to come up with sustainable ways to harvest and while still preserving wildlife. In the Sand County Almanac, he came up with what is called the land ethic concept, something that was certainly already around with indigenous cultures throughout the US, but something he put down into writing. We can see it here. A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise. And he kind of succinctly put it down to the land ethic simply enlarges the boundaries of community to include soils, water, plants, and animals, or collectively the land. Another kind of feather in our cap, earlier this year, we were designated as a national historic landmark. The designation was based on the Arboretum's pioneering work in restoration ecology. its place in history of conservation, and of course, its commitment to Aldo Leopold's land ethic. And with that, our mission statement here is to conserve and restore the Arboretum's lands, advance restoration ecology, and foster the land ethic. And the horticultural gardens is really where that fostering the land ethic comes in as well. Well, Aldo is probably the best known of our former colleagues here at the Arboretum. It is G. William Longenecker who had the biggest effect upon the Arboretum. He was the first director of the Arboretum, position he held for about 31 years. And he was also the collection's first curator, a position he held a little bit longer, till 1965. Along with doing that, he was also a horticulture professor on campus, as well as the first chair of the UW-Madison Department of Landscape Architecture. With all that, somehow he still found time to help mow some of the horticultural areas as well. Just an amazing individual. This is what the land looked like when he and Aldo first came to it in 1933. It was really a wide open area made up primarily of old farms. A lot of our property is quite wet, so farming did not work too well. We can see Madison over here. We can see the Capitol is not yet quite fully built. Here's the Capitol, here's the university. We have a chain of lakes here, and we own most of the land around this one. It's called Lake Wingra. Well, between then and now, here we are in 1937, and here we are just a few years ago. So quite a large change on the landscape. Most of that due to the foresight of G. William Longenecker. And how did he do that? Well, as I mentioned, he was a landscape architect as well as a horticulturalist, and he had many, many plans. And this is just one of those plans that shows some of our horticultural collection as he saw it back in the 30s. Well, it's great to have a lot of plans, but how do you put those into action? Well, again, this was during the Great Depression, and how he was able to put that into action was with the CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps. And if folks aren't familiar with that, it is indeed part of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, and provided jobs to young men, was only to young men, to relieve families who had difficulty finding jobs during the Great Depression. One fact I find quite fascinating still is that they were paid $30 a week, $25 of which had to be sent back to their families to help with their well-being. Camp Madison, as came to be known, had 200 men stationed here between 1935 and 1941. And it's really through them that the Arboretum's infrastructure, the roads, walls, trails, as well as the initial plantings in both the prairie and the horticultural gardens were able to happen. A few pictures of those gentlemen back in their heyday. You can see they're doing everything from transplanting large-scale trees. I can't even imagine doing something like that today. Here's some of that prairie, early prairie restoration work, watering crew. They're all smiling, so they're certainly not being made to do this. And here's a little bit of that stonework that I had mentioned as well. Well, we'll transition here into the Longenecker Horticultural Gardens. Something that's a little clunky in name, but they gave the Longenecker, obviously, was named for G. William Longenecker at his retirement in 1967. They gave it the horticultural garden designation really to differentiate it from the rest of the 1,200 acres here, which are only planted in native species and have most of the species native to the state. The horticultural gardens as we know it today are about 38 acres. I've actually added about 2 more acres onto that we're just developing now, as well as putting a little children's activity area as well. We currently house over 2,600 different taxa of woody plants from around the world that are hardy to our climate, And that comes out to about 4,000 different plants. All accessions are labeled, of known origin, GPSed and mapped. And what the gardens really represent is a living laboratory for both the university community and the state as a whole to research and experience woody plants appropriate for our region. Far from being simply a relic in time, we do add new plants yearly and keep our collection current. I had to come in from transplanting a few new things just this morning. While Longenecker began the gardens, it's really this gentleman, Ed, as we all know him, Hasselkiss, who did most of the plantings that make up the gardens today. Ed was another horticulture professor from UW, and he was actually a student, a PhD student of G. William Longenecker's, and he was handpicked by Longenecker to take over the gardens in 1966. Ed taught over 3,000 undergraduate students during his tenure here, as well as 45 grad students. I was the 44th of his grad students, so right towards the end here. Ed did curate the gardens for nearly 50 years, and to his great being, he did that for the last 20 years as a volunteer prior to my being hired. We'll go through some of our flagship plantings. We have one of the largest and perhaps one of the oldest lilac plantings in North America. The first planting was April 19th, 1935. At that point, lilacs were quite the rage. We had new species being still discovered in Asia at that time. You can see Longenecker's original concept here. Each of these beds would have been hand dug and we can see that here, by the CCC. And what Longenecker was trying to create with this garden were intimate little rooms that would divide up that, at that point, wide open landscape. Still one of our most cherished collections, and they are in full bloom today. I wish you all could be out here to experience that fragrance. We just had our highest visitation during Mother's Day, when we have well over 1,000 people just in that little section of the garden. Give you a little sense of the diversity of what we have out there. Probably about 500 different taxa at this point in the garden. If Longenecker's true love was the lilacs, Ed Hasselkiss's true love was crab apples. So he created what we consider to be the most up-to-date collection in the world. So they're not the largest. Ohio State has a collection of 600, but we and Ed, prior to me, would transition them. Number one disease issue is apple scab. The disease continues to morph, so what may be resistant today may not be resistant in the future. And as Ed saw things losing their resistance, he would simply remove them and replant them with something new and improved. Ed was also quite enamored with fruit retention. What he would tell you is that all crab apples look beautiful in bloom, but what do they look like the rest of the year? So Ed would come out monthly during the winter months and actually rate each of these crab apples for fruit retention, and giving the highest marks to things that had fruit that were bite-sized for birds. A little more of a sense of the size and scope of that crabapple collection. Intermingled with the crabapples through the years is quite a robust magnolia collection. We had an amazing bloom period this year. We have over 80 accessions, and I plan to add about 10 more to the gardens this year. Some of our highlights here, of course, the yellow magnolias are quite in fashion these days. We have one of the earliest here in Elizabeth, and one of the newest in Lois there. And again, just you can see the wide sweeping nature of the gardens. Unlike many botanical gardens who are confined to smaller spaces and have their woody plants in flowering beds, we have the luxury to be able to expand over the almost 40 acres, and we try to allow each woody specimen to attain its full size and spread. Another one of our flagship collections is our conifer collection. We refer to it as the Pinetum, and it is planted on a glacial drumlin. Well, I came from Virginia and I didn't exactly know what a glacial drumlin was when I came out here, but I quickly learned, and it's really what we're looking at here. It's a gently sloping hill created by a glacier. Glaciers really worked as bulldozers, and they pushed soil in front of them. And as they receded and melted, they deposited that soil behind. So in these glaciated landscapes, we can have very different soil types in a very small area. So what Longenecker discovered back in the day was that this section contained slightly acidic soils and was very sandy, both of which are actually perfect for most conifers. We planted the first trees there in 1937, but it really wasn't until 1976 that Ed Hasselkus decided we needed a much more robust conifer collection, and he began planting conifers yearly after that. The collection currently has over 600 specimens of over 560 taxa. And in 2015, we were named an American Conifer Society reference garden. And this gives you kind of a sense of all the specimens there, how everything is accessioned. And this is our GPS map here that gives us a view of what we have. With conifers, it can be easy to lose our accession tags within. Here are those original white pines that were planted in 1937. Here's a little overview. This actually predates drones. This would have been taken by a helicopter, oh boy, about 10 years back. And this shows you a little bit of the collection, highlighting the Colorado blue spruce. We do indeed have to deal with snow, something you don't see too much in Blacksburg or the rest of Virginia. But the conifer collection, it really is magical in the winter time. We do allow people to cross-country ski out here, and it is quite fun to go through it on skis. Some of their other collections, we have an amazingly robust Panicle hydrangea collection. When I came here for grad school, if you talk to Panicle hydrangeas, it was simply the PG hydrangea, Paniculata grandiflora. Since then, there's been an amazing amount of breeding going on. First starting in Europe, even though these are native to Japan. And then now a lot of development is happening here as well. We have over 65 accessions, almost every cultivar that's on the market and some that aren't here. Just give us a dazzling display of color during the summer months. We get about 6 months of interest in those. They almost all will start with this white and then fade to a pink to red here. When I started and started to really look into this collection, what amazed me was the number of pollinators that we had visiting these. It is kind of amazing because most of these have been bred for these, what appear to be large flowers, but are not true flowers and are actually sterile. They're actually showy sepals. The true flowers are these smaller buds within. Well, that first year I was here, we had a group associated with the National Geographic Association making a film called A Ghost in the Making. And it was about the rusty patch bumblebee, a native bumblebee species that was disappearing rapidly from North America. And we had one of the few documented populations that were still going strong. When they came out to film, they expected to spend all their time in our prairie restorations. And instead, they spent over half a day just filming the rusty patch on Panicle hydrangeas. And that further got me thinking. And if folks didn't know, the rusty patch has actually been put on the Endangered Species Act, something that just occurred a couple of years ago. Well, I work quite a bit with students. I had a student who was very interested in doing a work study program a couple of years ago named Gustavo Menez. And I said, hey, Gustavo, you know, I've been thinking about trying to document through photographs the diversity of pollinators just on our Panicle hydrangeas. He was quite excited about that. And he just finished his second year of doing monitoring last year. But we'll look, this is a little snippet of what he found that first year. Here's the rusty patch bumblebee over here. And you can see where it gets its name from that little rusty belt, if you will, around its outer abdomen. Well, Gustavo came in, took weekly pictures, over 38,000 or 100 rather that first year, and well over 4,000 last year. Tell you the truth, we're still going through them now, right? Have the pictures of last year's here. He documented well over 35 different species using these flowers during the season. And something that really can be amazing is the later blooming ones will be in bloom when the monarchs come through, and they can just be, the flowers can just be absolutely alive with monarchs. He also discovered that many insects will use these showy sepals, these sterile flowers, if you will, that trap morning dew in them, and they'll use them as a source of water. He's also seen things like dragonflies perch upon the top of these panicles here. It gives them a great view to see other insects that may make a tasty lunch or, excuse me, or breakfast. We'll move on now. A few of our other quite well-known collections. Here is our flowering cherries. Had a great display this year as well. We are also well known, if you ever find yourself out by us in late June into early July, almost always on July 4th, you will see our American chestnuts in bloom. To tell you the truth, I'd never seen a full-grown American chestnut before I came here to school until I ambled out in the gardens. Well, these, we know we got seed from these in 1955. We know the original plants that the seed was derived from came from a nursery in New York State in 1876, before chestnut blight came in through New York City and would decimate the millions, really, of chestnuts throughout North America. Chestnuts were not native to Wisconsin. They came just into Michigan. Given our predominantly westerly wind, as well as a great lake, Lake Michigan between us and Michigan. Knock on wood, these trees have never seen chestnut blight and are fully healthy. This is my youngest daughter, Sylvie, standing in front of one of them in the background here around 4th of July a couple of years ago. Fall color is certainly always a huge time for us. Here's local high school students who come out just to play in the leaves. One of my favorites is the Olga Bay larch, one of our few deciduous conifers. Always has an amazing fall color, native to Russia to Siberia, one of the most cold hardy woody plants in the world. And I think it's just happy to be here and not in Siberia. I think that's probably why it has such a great color every year. A little bit more of our maple collection, everything from Korean maples in the front to native reds and sugars in the back. Another thing people really come out here for, and actually was the full name of the Arboretum in 1933. It was the Arboretum and Wildlife Refuge, are the wildlife. So we have an amazing array of birds here, especially this time of year when they're migrating. I mentioned Madison sits on a chain of lakes, and they'll move through those lakes in their migration. We have everything from coyotes to deer, of course, one of my nemesis, to you name it. We actually found a mink den in our rose garden just 2 weeks ago. or I would have put that picture on here as well. One of the things, as a Virginia Tech alumni, I can't overlook here are turkeys. Turkeys have become really emblematic of the gardens. You cannot walk through them today without seeing 1 to 100 on your walk. They are still in their breeding mode, so you can see the toms in full regalia every morning. It's just kind of amazing to see. Well, turkeys were not always here, and certainly they weren't here when I came here in 1991 to get my master's degree. So the wild turkey was hunted to extinction in Wisconsin by the late 1800s, about the same time the last passenger pigeon was unfortunately killed in Wisconsin. They tried to reintroduce these birds, they being our Department of Natural Resources, a couple of times. Both of those times they tried to do it by rearing those birds in captivity, like we would raise chickens. Well, once they got out of captivity and put them in the landscape, they had no idea how to survive and quickly perished. So in 1976, they came up with a new plan and they worked with the state of Missouri and wild captured just a small number of wild turkeys and introduced them to a few spots around the state. And at this point in time, the population from those first 35 or so that were introduced is now 350,000. It is considered to be the most successful reintroduction of a native animal species in the world. They first started reappearing in the Arboretum just in the early 2000s. And as I mentioned, you cannot go through the Arboretum without seeing a lot of turkeys. Become a garden icon, really. And as I mentioned, my predecessor at Haskell's used to pride himself in doing surveys of our 200 plus crabapple cultivars, looking at winter fruit retention, while the turkeys kind of did away with that. That said, that's about all the damage they do. They really don't do any other damage here, occasionally a broken limb or something. Quickly, I'll go through a few things. Not only do we have a great collection of plants, but we've introduced and are right now still introducing a number of woody ornamentals that are available in the trade throughout the country. Our black tupelo we have here is just iconic. It sits in front of our visitor center. It was named for Ed Hasselkiss's oldest granddaughter, Carolyn. It was first introduced very regionally, unfortunately is not in production yet, but I am currently working with the Morton Arboretum, a much larger sister arboretum down outside of Chicago, and the Chicagolands Grow plant introduction program. And we are looking to reintroduce Carolyn in a few years. We know she originated actually in Exeter, New Hampshire, and is exceptionally cold hardy, but has an absolutely glorious and long-lived fall color, unlike any other black tupelo I believe anybody's ever seen. This is just at the beginning of her fall color. She will become darker and darker maroon. Eye stopper cork tree. Well, cork trees have become invasive on the East Coast. We only have male trees out here, and indeed this is a male tree, so does not produce fruit. It was named because of its outstanding yellow fall color. And you can see it was given the cultivar name of Longenecker. A few other, white spire birch is common. It's probably the most planted white barked birch in the Midwest. And it was discovered here as well in the late 1970s. Problem with these white barked birches is when they become heat stressed. They are then almost always attacked by the bronze birch borer. It is native, but it does a similar number to birch that we are seeing emerald ash borer doing on ash today. Well, Ed Hasselkiss again saw that this one survived just fine, while all the rest of the white barked birches in the collection perished within a few years of being involved in that drought. So he thought, indeed, it appeared to be heat tolerant. So he sent it out, some cuttings, to a colleague in Texas who grew them out for a few years. And he concurred that indeed it was heat tolerant. So it's actually a gray birch native to the Northeast, but has a delightful appearance and form. The Tromner spruce is another one that we're just working with Chicagoland Grows to introduce. You'll probably see it by the trade name Blue Dragon. And this was a hybrid of the Colorado blue spruce and the Syrian, why am I drawing a blank here? It's Picea omaranca and the Picea pungens in a hybrid form. So it has the amazing form of that omaranca parent, along with the blue glaucous growing tips that come from the Colorado blue spruce parent. Colorado blue spruce is not doing well for us in our climate here. I'm assuming it's not doing well at this point in Virginia as well, being native to a much more dry climate. It's succumbing to a number of fungal needle diseases. But what we're finding with this Tromner hybrid is that it does not seem to be affected by the diseases, mostly needle cast disease, that we're seeing on Colorado blue spruce. Another one that's just going to be coming into the marketplace as we speak is Dream Cloud. This is a specimen that came to us as an unnamed sport, a little variety off of Miss Kim, a very, very popular diminutive lilac, a late bloomer. This is a pink form of Miss Kim. It's being introduced, as I said, right now, and all the proceeds from its sales will come back to the Longenecker Gardens to help with our upkeep. Another one that I'll quickly show is Northern Glow Maple. What we found here is that Japanese maple is just not reliably hardy for us. So Ed again found that the closely related Korean maple, which is Acer pseudosibolianum, was indeed quite cold hardy. So he set out to find and acquire as many cultivars as possible. And indeed, he got some just seedless seed from the Arnold Arboretum in Boston. When he grew them out, he found that what he had was not a true Korean maple, but he had a hybrid. And he discovered that the hybrid was with a Japanese maple. So this one has a much more deeply incised and cut leaf to it. Comes out with a nice red foliage color, and it returns to this color in the fall. So it was released, and now you all know where that cultivar name came from, but it has a little more easy to say name for the trade in Northern Glow. And with that, here is the gardens as they looked just, oh boy, about a month and a half ago. So I hope I didn't overstep my time here, but at this point, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Yes, there are a couple questions. So one is referring to, you talked about the crab apples were rated in the winter.
Yes.
So the question was, how is that done? Aren't they bare in winter? Could you expand more on that?
Sure. So crab apples, while they're in flower as we speak, they will hold their fruit Now, traditionally, crab apples we will find in the wild, as soon as we get the first hard freeze, those fruit will soften. At the point that they soften, birds will almost immediately begin to eat them. Well, what breeders discovered over time is that certain selections would not soften, the fruit would not soften with the first freeze. So because of that, they'll hold throughout the winter. Really, birds are looking for that fruit to be soft before they will eat it. So many of the selections that are now cultivars rather on the market have these smaller, persistent fruit that will be there all the way till the spring.
Okay, great. So there was a question about how technique for your GPS mapping. How are you all doing that?
Sure. So what we're doing is simply using a high-end called a Trimble GPS unit. So we'll go out, we stand on the same side of the specimen, and then we'll simply take its coordinates. We're able to save all those coordinates within that GPS unit. We have a mapping specialist here on our staff who then is able to take that, superimpose that onto a satellite image.
Okay, great. Question, let's see, needle cast and blue spruce. This person has lost several. Any suggestions for treatment?
You know, you can go online as well. Really the only thing that you've got in the toolbox would be fungicidal sprays. Unfortunately, that has to be done at least twice during the growing season. Other than that, certainly if we can increase airflow with it, so siting is quite important. We don't want that in a low-lying area where humidity or high amounts of moisture would collect. And we want to make sure that there's good airflow through it. If you have the ability, certainly picking up needles each year can get rid of some of that inoculum, but there's just really not a great way to avoid it at this point.
Okay, great. So you hinted that deer are an issue there. What do you all do, if anything, to try and deter them?
Well, because we are a gateless arboretum, we don't have the ability to fence in. With that said, we do put erect deer exclusion fencing around their favorite things like arborvitae, azaleas, things of that nature every year. Unfortunately, that doesn't always work. They can be quite pushy, and in a heavy snow load year like we had this year, they'll get hungry enough, they'll get into that. We don't talk about it a lot because we are in town, but I'm hoping none of you will say anything. We do a little bit of targeted hunting here, but I'll tell you, it barely touches the population.
Okay, yeah, no, our population around here just seems to be growing and growing. We're lucky they haven't found our garden yet, knock on wood.
Yes.
Another question, do you fertilize your lilac trees each year? Theirs are large but did not bloom this year.
We do no fertilizing. Really, we do a little here and there. We simply put wood chips that we create in-house from other parts of the property on there. Lilacs don't tend to need much for fertilizer, and certainly we find if we over-fertilize them, especially with a nitrogen-based fertilizer, that can the following year create a lack of blooms just through too much vegetative growth on those. Now remember, lilacs will set their buds directly after flowering, so they will hold those buds over winter. And they're not always going to have an extremely showy flower display. We had not a great one 2 years ago, and that was really due to our very harsh winter. We're having a fantastic one this year. So another thing can be, if your lilac is quite old, you may have to rejuvenate it. And that is done by taking out, usually do that over a 3-year period. We would go in and cut a third of the oldest, largest stems down to the ground level the first year. Second year, we would take the next third of the oldest and largest canes out. And the third year, we would do again. So in that fourth year, the plant is all new canes. Now, saying that, that's really just for the common lilacs, Syringa vulgaris. We can also do that with the hyacinth flora, Syringa X hyacinthiflora, but not with most of the Asiatics. They really don't need pruning, and they will not come back through suckers.
Okay, thank you. Another question, any trees or plants you miss from Virginia that will not survive a Wisconsin winter?
Oh, where to start? Yes, we have so many that I came to know, even so many of the azaleas that I knew in Virginia, and certainly all the Asiatic ones, we simply can't do here. We're really slimmed down to things like that. You know, our evergreen hollies, southern magnolias, things of that sort. We just can't. We just can't grow here.
Okay. Another question. Fall leaf litter. What do you do with the material that falls each year?
We simply mulch. We take put a mulching kit on our lawnmowers, and we mulch them right into the lawn. If I had more help, what I'd probably do is collect them and use them as a mulch in the beds instead of wood chips.
Okay, so you're just grinding it up and leaving it basically for fertilizer for the turf area then?
That's correct, yep.
All right, I think that's all the questions. I did have one question. So the research about the pollinators on the Panicle hydrangeas, is that something you guys are gonna publish at some point?
Yes.
Okay.
So as I mentioned, we're still, so my student takes the pictures weekly, but it's really my technician. It's a great winter project for him to go through and ID them. So unfortunately, my student got a little more zealous, shall we say, in his picture taking last year, and took more than we could go through in a winter. So we're waiting for a few more rainy days to go through that. And then we'll do one more year this year of monitoring, and then we hope to publish in the next 2 years.
I think that could be some really good information because you definitely don't really think of that as a big pollinator supporter.
No, you don't. You certainly don't.
Okay.
And at this point, they're coming out with so many different sizes that you can find one for literally any size yard or garden.
All right, well, that looks like all the questions. David, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us today. And we hope you'll come and find a reason to come to Blacksburg and come visit us.
I would absolutely love to.
Yeah, and so for those of you who are attending, we have one more of these Zoom tours. It'll be in 2 weeks. That's Wednesday, May 26th at the same time, 2 o'clock. We're gonna go to Lotus Land in California. So it should be an interesting change from what we're looking at in Wisconsin to California in 2 weeks. So once again, David, thank you very much. And thanks everybody for attending. Have a great day.
Thanks a lot.